The scorching twin suns of Zaruthos Prime beat down mercilessly on the bustling spaceport marketplace. Nathan wiped the sweat from his brow, adjusting the straps of his supply pack as he navigated through the crowded bazaar. As a humanitarian worker for the Terran Aid Coalition, he'd seen his share of desperate worlds, but Zarathos was different. This planet sat on the edge of contested space, where 3 different alien empires converged, and refugees flooded in daily. He was heading back to his shuttle when he heard a small, pitiful whimpering coming from an alley between 2 corrugated metal structures. Nathan paused, his instincts pulling him toward the sound. There, huddled in the shade, were 2 small creatures unlike any he'd seen before. They had iridescent blue skin that shimmered even in the shadows, large eyes that reflected multiple colors, and delicate crystalline structures protruding from their foreheads. "Hey there," Nathan said softly, kneeling down to their level. The children 4, that's clearly what they were, recoiled slightly, their tiny bodies trembling. He noticed their skin had begun to crack, the shimmer fading to a dull gray. Dehydration. He'd seen it enough times to recognize it instantly, without hesitation. Nathan pulled out his canteen. Water was precious on Zaruthos, worth more than credits in some districts. But these children needed it more than he did. He offered the container to the older of the 2, a girl who couldn't have been more than 6 in human years. She stared at him with those kaleidoscope eyes, uncertain. Nathan smiled and took a small sip himself, then offered it again. This time, she took it with shaking hands and drank deeply. Her brother followed suit, and Nathan watched as color slowly returned to their skin, the cracks beginning to heal. "Where are your parents?" he asked, though he doubted they understood Galactic Common. The girl pointed down the alley toward the deeper parts of the refugee sector. Nathan's heart sank. That area was controlled by the Korthax Syndicate, a ruthless gang that preyed on the desperate. He couldn't leave them here. Making a decision that would change his life, Nathan scooped up both children and began walking toward the sector station. He'd find their parents, or at least get them to a safe shelter. The little girl clutched his shirt, her crystalline forehead structure catching the light, and Nathan felt a surge of protectiveness. What he didn't know was that 4 blocks away, Helen, known throughout 6 star systems as the Crimson Reaper, had just torn through her 7th Kordak stronghold that day. Her armor was scorched, her weapons nearly depleted, but her eyes burned with an intensity that had made warlords flee and armies surrender. Helen was a species renowned for their combat prowess and unbreakable will. She stood nearly 7 feet tall, her body a masterwork of natural armor and refined muscle. The crystalline horns on her head, markers of her royal lineage, gleamed like blood-red diamonds. She had conquered 12 worlds before her 30th birthday, unified the Valkorian clans, and become the youngest fleet commander in her species' history. But none of that mattered now. Her children were missing. She had been negotiating a supply treaty when the Korthax had attacked, using the chaos to kidnap her twins. They wanted leverage against the Valkorian Empire. They had made a fatal mistake. Helen had spent the last 6 hours painting the refugee sector red with Korthax blood, following every lead, interrogating every survivor. Her reputation preceded her, and now refugees scattered at her approach, whispering her name with a mixture of awe and terror. Then she heard a transmission on her scanner. A human had been spotted carrying 2 Valkorian children toward the sector station. A human, the weakest species in the known galaxy, soft and fragile, with barely any natural defenses. What game was this? Helen's hand moved to her plasma rifle as she changed direction, her powerful legs carrying her swiftly through the streets. If this human had harmed her children, she would make his death last for days. Nathan had just reached the sector station when he heard the screaming. People were running, scrambling to get out of the way of something. He turned, confused, still holding the 2 children protectively against his chest. Then he saw her. The creature approaching was magnificent, and terrifying in equal measure. Crimson armor covered most of her body, battle-scarred and splattered with substances Nathan didn't want to identify. Her face was angular and fierce, with those same crystalline structures the children had. Only hers were larger, sharper, glowing with an inner fire. In her hands was a weapon that looked capable of vaporizing a building, and she was staring directly at him. Nathan's survival instincts screamed at him to run, but he couldn't move. The little girl in his arms suddenly squealed with joy, reaching out toward the approaching warrior. Time seemed to freeze. Helen stopped 10 feet away, her weapon trained on Nathan, her eyes scanning her children for any sign of harm. She saw their restored color, the water stains on their clothes, the way they clung happily to this human who should have been cowering in terror. "You gave them water," Helen said, her voice like grinding stones, speaking perfect Galactic Common. Nathan swallowed hard. They were dying. I couldn't just leave them. Water is expensive here. Worth 300 credits per liter. I know. Helen's eyes narrowed. You are human. Your species is known for self-preservation, for calculation, for taking what benefits you. She lowered her weapon slightly. Why would you sacrifice valuable resources for alien children you've never met? Nathan looked down at the two small faces peering up at him, then back at their mother. He shrugged. Because they needed help. That's just what we do. For a long moment, Helen stared at this fragile creature who had saved her children without knowing who they were, without expecting reward, without even hesitation. She had studied humans in her military training week, short-lived with no natural weapons or armor, but her instructors had mentioned something else, something she'd dismissed as propaganda. Humans had something her species called irrational compassion, the ability to care for complete strangers, even at cost to themselves. She had thought it weakness. Now, holding her children who were alive because of it, she wasn't so sure. Helen holstered her weapon and approached. Nathan forced himself to stand still as she reached out with hands that could crush his skull. Gently, almost reverently, she took her children from him. They babbled happily in their native language, pointing at Nathan and clearly telling her about their adventure. What is your name, human? Helen asked. Nathan Cord. Nathan Cord, she repeated, committing it to memory. You have done the Volcorian Empire a service beyond measure. You have saved the heirs to the throne. She touched her forehead in what he recognized as a gesture of deep respect. I am Helen Verkath, fleet commander and mother of clans. You have my life debt. Nathan blinked. I what? By Valkorian law, you have saved my children. I owe you a debt that can never be fully repaid. Her fierce eyes softened slightly. But I will spend my life trying. In the days that followed, Nathan learned what it meant to have the protection of the Crimson Reaper. The Korthak Syndicate was eliminated from Zerothos Prime within 48 hours. Helen personally ensured the refugee sector received supplies, protection, and resources. She established a permanent Valkorian aid station with Nathan at its head. But more than that, she watched Nathan work, saw him treat every being with dignity regardless of species or status. She saw him share his food, give his shelter, exhaust himself helping others. And slowly, the fiercest woman in the galaxy began to understand that humanity's strength wasn't in weapons or armor, that it was in their unshakable belief that kindness was never weakness, that compassion was its own form of courage, and that sometimes the bravest thing you could do was offer water to a stranger's child.